Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at a way to use macros using the XY pad that's found in QLink Edit. That is not this XY effects that we see here in the menu. If we press that, this one is where we add it as an insert effect to either any of our outputs, any of our submixes or returns, or any tracks or pads in a drum program. The XY pad that I'm talking about is only found by pressing and holding your QLink button and going into QLink Edit. And that XY pad is here. As you can see, we've got 8 columns and 8 rows. So aside from the X and Y axis, as you can see here, we've got X and Y, we can add a particular set of effects or a macro control set to any one of these. So we've got 8 rows, 8 columns, and we've also got these northwest quad x-axis, northwest quad y-axis, northeast, southwest, and southeast. So let's go back to column 1 and let's add an effect here. So first of all, I'm going to go to Program Edit and make sure that for this breakbeat that I've got here, we've got a filter. As you can see, there's no filter. Let's put a low pass 4-pole filter there. Let's go back into QLink Edit to the XY pad. So we're on column 1, and over here on the right, we're going to press the plus symbol. We're going to go to Track. We're going to go to Pads. We're going to choose Bank A and Pad A01. Filter cutoff is found in Edit, where you can see all the parameters for the drum program, and we'll choose Filter Cutoff there. So now when I swipe my finger down the screen in this column only, it will affect the filter frequency for our drum break. Now you can see that momentary is engaged. So this means wherever I tap my finger and release it, the filter cutoff will be engaged until I release my finger. We can switch that off, and now the behavior is slightly different. You can see that it holds. Alongside that, we've also got toggle. So if we put toggle on, this is what happens. So toggle toggles between the maximum and the minimum range, which we can set here where it says parameter range. That's what toggle does. We can also choose trigger max. So if I press this now, you'll see this little indicator circle will jump straight up, or wherever I press my finger, it will make the value jump straight up to 127. Okay, so no matter where I press now, the filter is going to be fully open. Now you might be saying, well, what's that useful for when it's not responding to a range or changing that actual parameter? Well, you can set the maximum to be something particular. So obviously in a scenario where there's a particular value that you want to max out at a particular value, let's say for a distortion, for example, you might not want it to be maximum distortion. You can obviously set that maximum here and always have that effect go straight to that maximum that you set. So that's what that's good for. Before we start adding any more effects to the XY grid here, I'll take you through all these different options. So I've shown you the parameter range. Let's just switch this back to off for the toggle and switch momentary back on. So again, this is how that behaves. So obviously in this momentary mode, that's good for live performance unless you want it to hold. So in that case, you would switch momentary off. But if we press the downward arrow there, we can also choose go to minimum or go to previous. So let's see what that does. If we switch go to minimum on, it will now adhere to whatever we set the minimum to. So obviously the next time I touch that, that's just going to go to 0. Likewise, if I increase the minimum value to, let's say 60, it's going to go to 60. That's all that does. Let's drop it down again. Let's uncheck that and go to previous. So wherever I touch this, it will go to the previous value that's registered wherever I touch my finger. So it's still adhering to this 60, which was the minimum, and that was the previous setting. So again, if I change that to 85, it still is playing back at the 60 value, but next time I press it, because we've set it to go to previous, it will now go to 85. So I'll leave that to you to decide how you use those different facilities. There's many different use cases for those. Let's just adjust these back to the absolute minimum and maximum of 0 and 127. Before we move on to any other effects, let's just go through a bit more of what's happening up here. We've got learn. So before we get to the learn function, which I'll use for the next effect for column 2, let's just discuss these other parameters. So let's talk about the control input. Control input basically controls how the XY controller responds to our interactions with it. So these are basically curves. So if you just think about the maximum value and a diagonal line going from the maximum down to the minimum, that's what a linear curve is. If we go to logarithmic, it's kind of slightly bowed outwards, so it's kind of smoother and would take longer to reach the minimum value from top to bottom. And then we've got almost the opposite of that, which is exponential. So that curve will sweep down a lot quicker and it will be slightly bent inversely, if that makes sense. So you'll notice when in exponential mode, this filter sweep will engage a lot quicker. So, you know, maybe somewhere around here, it will sweep down a lot quicker. Okay, so this filter is fully closed around 2/3 of the way down or just below halfway. So in logarithmic mode, it's going to sweep down a lot slower because, as said, it's going to go on a curve like this. Logarithmic and linear are very similar. So the logarithmic is just a little bit longer and requires a bit more of a distance to kick in. But linear is very similar. So again, I'll leave that for you to decide based on what effects respond best to those different curves. And again, we've got a minimum and maximum range, so we can control the behavior as well. We've got, you know, control over that with a minimum and maximum value. One thing I didn't mention is we can flip this. So there's a good reason for that. Let's say we're in a live performance and we've got used to this filter cutoff going from top to bottom because it's following the actual behavior. Fully open up the top, fully closed down the bottom. That's the way I think of frequencies from top to bottom, obviously high to low. But when you've got another effect, say a delay, and you want to send your pad to that delay via one of the returns, this, you'll see when I do that, it will automatically have this at the bottom because it's thinking you want to sweep up to open that out. But we have to flip that control. So I'll show you that now because we're going to get into this learn function. Just one last thing, as said, we've got off, toggle and trigger max. And that does actually fall in line with some options we've got in the learn, but we'll do that after. So if I press column 2, let's use this column to send this pad into a delay. Before I do that, I'll go to track mix, swipe across the screen, and I'll go to return to where we've got our delay. So if you don't already know, sends and returns are best used for time-based effects, in particular reverbs and delays, and that's why we have those on there by default when we start a new project in MPC. I'd just like to adjust the time of the delay because it's a bit short with the default setting. And I just also like to give it feedback value. Anything over 80 can start to feedback and you start getting, you know, excessive overload of the repeating signal. I'd leave the mix at 100%. You particularly will get some feedback if you start adding this resonance into the mix, but it does produce some nice effects as long as you've got the feedback at a moderate value. So something around 70, 75 is the absolute maximum for that. Right, let's go back to Q-Link Edit. Now we've set the delay up. And we're going to press Learn. That's all we need to do. Now we're going to go to Program Edit. You can see it says Track Edit not available for return track. So that means we've got to come out of our main. So this is main mode for your track mixers, which includes the return submixes and main outputs. Just swipe across to go back to your track and select it. And now we can go back to Program Edit, remembering it's still in Learn mode, that yellow button I pressed in the XY pad setup page. So whatever we press next is going to be registered. And this is this pad for the breakbeat and send to. That's going to send a portion of this breakbeat sound or this pad sound to our return. So you can see it's learned that, right? So let's press and hold, go back to Q-Link Edit, go back to XY pad, and you can see that send to is successfully registered here. And like I said, we can see that our little round indicator there is at the bottom. So this breakbeat will now play as normal, and then when we increase this from top to bottom, you'll hear the delay come through. Okay, so I personally, this is completely personal choice, I want to flip that control. You see it, once I flip it, that jumps up to the top. So I know now that if I'm in a live performance situation or I'm just in the studio programming, that if I want to control the filter, I can bring that down. And if I want to open the delay or send my breakbeat to that delay or whatever sample, I also have to bring that down. Otherwise, I would think it would get a bit confusing because you're going to have to think, well, okay, I'm adding this or I'm reducing that and it's flipped and it's upside down. I'd rather them all be following the same movement. But obviously that might change based on different use cases. So another thing to mention, we can name these. So it says pad A01 send to. Let's say, for example, we wanted to put some effects for different pads on here. Well, I would keep the A01 and just put A01 delay. That would make sense to me. So I know that column 2 is going to be controlling our delay. There's a good reason for naming your macros. And that's because you can copy macros, and if you don't name them, it will default to whatever parameter you've set up here. So even though this is A01 delay, and we've got that here, send to, that's what it was originally called, I might populate this column or this list of parameters that column 2 is going to control, because it's a macro. So we might have several different effects here, but the name will always firstly adhere to that. So if you don't custom name your macros, so for example, if I added a filter to this, I would call it A01 delay filter. And I would just put as many things in that name that tell me what that control does. We'll get to that a little bit later on. So now we've got our filter and our delay. Now, these will only work individually. They won't work simultaneously. They will if you cross over, but they're not kind of blending in with each other. So wherever this filter stops, like halfway, that's where that will be with your finger on the screen, depending on whether you've got it in momentary or not. But if you jump over to that column, okay, so as an example, let's engage the filter. As I'm moving into column 2 or swiping over into column 2, you can hear that the filter's opening again. And that's because it's set to momentary. Let's go back to column 1. If I set column 1 to not be momentary, it will hold in that position and then I can jump across to the delay. Okay, so that's how the momentary control can affect and influence all of this behavior per column or per row. So they can be different, obviously. Column 1 is not momentary, column 2 is momentary. So you might want to set column 2 to be not momentary, so it will engage and hold wherever you leave it. But for something like delay, personally, I would rather it just be a burst of sound, particularly on a breakbeat that is very busy. But you might want to hold it for another reason on a different sound, and that's where you wouldn't use momentary. Hope that makes sense. So let's now actually populate column 3 with both of those effects, and then we can rename that macro to something that's suitable. So this is where we can copy the macros. Let me just make sure that column 1, yep, we've got AO1 filter cutoff. It's got brackets. I'd rather not have them there, but that's fine. At least we know that that's what that control does. Let's go to column 3. Let's press plus. Let's do copy existing macro. Now for the first one in the list, you can do replace or merge, it doesn't matter. But for any additional parameters that you add, you must choose merge, otherwise it will just replace the first one in the list. So let's just do replace, XY pad 1, let's choose delay, and let's go to copy again. Now, this is where we press merge, so it doesn't replace the delay parameter we just added. And we can do filter cutoff, okay? So now we can control both of these. So these are in parallel. So these will occur at the same time, but obviously again, we can give them different control input curves, and we can also affect the range of these. You'll also see that when we have copied these over, it's copied the flip behavior of the send. So I flip the send so it engages at the bottom in the same way that the filter cutoff, which is not flipped, sweeps down the frequency range. So let's take a listen to that. Okay, so we've got the flexibility with an isolated filter cutoff, an isolated delay, and now we've grouped both of those effects together in column 3. This is a classic macro, obviously, because it's using multiple controls. So now we would rename this ideally. Okay, so we can just add filter delay to pad AO1. So if we now go to column 4, we can press plus, copy existing macro, replace, because there's no other macro or parameter in that list. And you can see we've got that grouped together now. That is going to copy that entire macro with both of those parameters, and we can now add another one. But let's learn that one. Let's press learn. Let's go to program edit. I'm going to go to the second tab on my effects page, and I'm going to learn this decimator, which is like a sample rate reduction. You can see it's learned it already. I just lightly tapped on that, or you can move your main dial or a Q-link. However you interact with that, it will learn that. So let's press and hold Q-link, go to Q-link edit, XY pad, and you can see it says drum effects 4. So for this one, I think we need to flip it, and because it's in momentary mode for some reason, there you go. So just be aware that when it's in momentary mode, it might hold a value, and you might be thinking, well, I just flipped that. Why is it still happening at the top or the bottom or vice versa, whatever's happening? Just maybe uncheck that and touch the screen, because sometimes you need to clear a parameter value that's been held. So again, for me personally, I would rather flip the drum effects, because otherwise it's going to be fully engaged at the top and it won't fall in line with how I've got my other effects set up. So that's what learn does. We can learn a parameter, and now we've obviously got this new macro, which we can again rename. So we've got AO1 filter delay. We could just put DEC for decimator, Before I end this video, let's just take a look at the other options in this Learn menu. If we press the arrow, you can see that we've got 4 different options. The default is Add, which we've used to add the decimation effect or the drum effects number 4. We've also got Range. This will basically include a particular range. So let's just do that for column 5. So let's press Learn. Now what this does is whatever level that I bring this down to and leave it at, it will learn that level. So as an example, it's at 127 right now. I'll bring that down. You can see it says it's learned that range. Okay, I've brought it down to 67. Let's go back here, Q-Link Edit, XY pad, and you can see it's registered 67 as the minimum. So it's, at the very maximum. Okay, let's again take that out of momentary so it doesn't get tripped up. So the very maximum, it's actually gone to 124, but we can put it at 127 easy enough. The minimum is 67, so it learns the range. That's basically what it is. Whatever you bring it down to, it learns it. It's just a quick and convenient way for you to not adjust it here, but in some ways, you might as well just go and learn the parameter and just come back here and adjust it there. But maybe you've already got a parameter set at a certain value. That's where it would be handy. You could just go to it, and let's say this was already at something like 65. You would just tap it and it will register that for you. So it's just a bit of a quicker way to go about programming your minimum and maximum ranges. Let's drop that down again. Let's take it out of range. Again, we've got toggle, right? So this is just going to switch that toggle on for whatever you touch. Okay, so let's press Learn. Let's go to Program Edit. Maybe let's double tap. Where can we switch something on and off? In here. Okay, so on the samples page, let's switch on reverse. Okay, and it's learnt that. So that would be a good use case for a toggle function. So let's go back to Q-Link Edit, XY pad. Okay, so let's just get rid of that layer 1 level so it's not affecting anything. And let's just make sure we put that back up to maximum. So now we've got a toggle function from reverse. So whenever I tap this, it will reverse the sample. If I tap it again, it will put it back to its normal state. So you can hear that it's engaging that filter. It's just sometimes you have to go back up to the top to where your maximum values are just to clear that. Okay, so quick and easy way to flip your samples into reverse mode using that, and you can see toggle is switched on there. So we can learn the different states of things based on range, toggle, and the last one is trigger, and that is just basically trigger max. So if we had an effect that we wanted to quickly and easily learn and always have it at its maximum value, that's what that will do. So let's press Learn again. Let's go to Program Edit. Let's just say maybe one of the drum effects again. Maybe ring mod, just as an example. So it's learnt that. So it's going to ignore this 45 Hertz. It doesn't matter. It's learnt the maximum value. So basically, when I touch that column, that's just going to jump straight up to 8,000 Hertz immediately. So let's press and hold that. Q-Link Edit, XY pad. Okay, drum effects 1, and you can see that's already registered that trigger max. Okay, so it's always going to just jump up to that and just stay at that. You can't get out of it by putting momentary or anything like that. It's as soon as you touch it, it's going to jump to that maximum value. Now you might be thinking, what is the point of that function? Well, as you saw, some of my effects got stuck because, maybe this had jumped across there momentarily by accident and brought the filter down and engaged some of the delay and then engaged some of the decimator. You might get tripped up in a live situation where all your effects are just stuck. How do you get out of it? Well, that would be a perfect scenario to use Trigger Max, because you could put that in a column of its own and that would be your safety net. You could just go, oh, it's all stuck, everything's overloading, it doesn't sound how I want it to sound, etc, etc. You could just maybe tap over in column 8 and have that as some kind of reserve control to push your parameter up to the maximum value to get you out of a sticky situation. There's probably other good use cases for that. Again, I will leave that up to you to decide. So the last thing to show you is full screen. Obviously, once you've done all your programming, you can press full screen and you get a nice full screen XY controller for either performing live or in the studio programming. And just a note to mention on programming, in 3.6, we can drag this down. All of this stuff can be recorded as automation, you'll be pleased to know. So let's pull that back up and let's just automate something simply, like the filter cutoff. Okay, so really good if you think about how this could be used with a bunch of effects on a sound that is not rhythmic, maybe something that's weird, you want to make some weird movements and strange, textures for sound design. This can be really great. You can sweep through different sounds using all manner of different effects. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. As ever, all my links to everything that I do online down below in the description of this video, including links to my masterclass courses, my email address if you've got any questions or you want to book a private lesson with me, which are conducted on Zoom, or if you don't use Zoom, we can switch to another platform if you prefer. And of course, if you enjoy this content and you want to help and contribute to the channel, there's a few things you could do. First of all, if you haven't already, you can subscribe, you can like the video, and I've also got a PayPal email address if you want to donate, buy me a coffee, etc. All of that is down below this video in the description. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.